All right, tonight we begin in Matthew chapter 25 and verse 31. And as we start studying this, why, it's going to be, this particular section, the judgment scene, where God separates them, the left from the right, the goats from the sheep. Now this section is a rather long section as you look at it in your Bible, but the teaching is very, very simple, and each little thought he goes into somewhat of detail, but yet the details are pretty simple, so we'll be able to go through this pretty rapidly here. But it does give us now the picture of what the judgment scene is going to be like. And as we think about this, we want to think that one day we're going to be standing at that judgment seat. We're going to be kneeling before Christ, and these things that we're studying tonight, we're going to hear ourselves. So he said, "But when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the angels with him, then shall he sit on the throne of his glory." Now, when he talks about the throne of his glory, we'd understand he's going to sit on his throne. The throne of his glory is the throne that will glorify him. It is a throne that elevates him, that exalts him. That when we see him sitting on that throne, it will be an awesome sight. And so the throne of his glory. "And before him shall be gathered all the nations." So now here is a picture of all the people that have ever lived. All the nations that are going to be gathered together for this judgment day. "And he shall separate them one from another, as the shepherd separateth the sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left." Now, he's getting ready to talk to these sheep and goats, but what he's doing is just, he's giving a parable here, showing in common ordinary language what the judgment will be like in a scene that everybody can understand. Now, over in the Mideast, they run goats with their sheep. But that's not unusual because they also do that here in America. So they'll take their goats out, they'll take the sheep out, they'll take them around all day long, and then when they come back in the evening, they separate the goats from the sheep. And they put the goats over here, the sheep over here, because they have different habits, and they won't be getting along too well during the night if they're all pinned up into one small pen. So there is a separation that was normal with the people. They understood, sure, you separate your sheep from your goats. "Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come ye, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." So now he's going to, this will be the sheep. The people on the right hand are going to be the ones that are found innocent. Jewish tradition tells us that when the Sanhedrin had a trial, the people that were found innocent were placed on the right hand. The people that were found guilty were placed on the left hand. And so that's probably what he is referring to here. There's going to be a separation of the two different kinds of people. The sheep, the good ones, are going to be over on his right hand. That's a place of honor. And the goats, the place of dishonor on the left. Now then, he's going to tell them why he's going to put them there. He says, "Come ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared to you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee hungry, and fed thee, or thirst, and gave you drink? And when saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? And when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee?" So now, this is obviously what he's going to be telling them is that I'm going to be judging you on these bases. Now we have to understand these aren't the only bases, obviously, that he's going to be judging them on. But he's telling them that you're going to be judged on these small, insignificant things that you do to help people. It's a lot of times we worry about the big things. We think, boy, I haven't done this and I haven't done that, and therefore I really am a righteous man. A lot of times it's what I haven't done. I haven't robbed a bank. I haven't done this. I haven't done this, that. But here he's telling us he's going to be judging us on what we have done. Not big things, but small things. Now, when he says, when the king, if you will just try to picture him, here it is, he's up there, and he says, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. Now, the first thing that's going to come to anybody's mind is, yours and mine, I wasn't even alive when Jesus was here. How could I have given him something to eat? He was naked and I gave him some clothes. I don't remember ever meeting him. Or I was in prison and so forth, and you came to see me. And so they, Lord, when did we do this? And then here we're going to learn a very important lesson here. He's going to tell us when it is that he considered it to be done. It says, and the king shall answer and say to them, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you did it unto one of these my brethren, even the least, you did it unto me. So when you did this to one of the least of my brethren, you did it to me. Now, this is taught really in other places. We can begin to kind of put the picture together and say, oh, now I begin to see what he's talking about. When we do something to Christ, there's one great example given in the Bible to show us that you don't have to be around him at all. He can be back in heaven, and it's something that you do here, and he considers that to be something you've done to him. Does the example come to your mind just like a flash? All right, it is the Apostle Paul. You remember that the Apostle Paul was persecuting the church at Jerusalem, and then he was on his road up to Damascus to arrest and persecute the church up there. And the Lord shined that light down, knocked him to the ground. And you remember what the Lord said? Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And, well, who are you, Lord? And that's when then he told him, I'm Jesus of Nazareth. But he accused Paul of persecuting him. Now, Paul, as far as we know, had never met Jesus. Paul had never persecuted Jesus. Paul had never punished Jesus. Paul had never beaten him, never put him to death. Paul had not done these things to Jesus. But what would Jesus mean? Why persecutest thou me? What was it that Paul was persecuting? In Acts the 8th chapter, we're told very emphatically, the church, the brethren. Well, now how could that be interpreted, persecuting Jesus? When you persecute the church or anybody in the church, how could that be interpreted as persecuting Jesus? When we go to 1 Corinthians 12 or Ephesians chapter 1, verse 22 and 23, what is it that we find is the body of Christ? Jesus said he's the head and the church is the body. So if you came up here right now and took a ball bat, hit me in the stomach, doubled me over, reached down and broke a big toe, and walked away, I would say, why are you doing that to me? Now you might turn around and say, Lowell, I didn't hit you in the head. Here it is, I'm thinking with my head, I'm talking up here with my head. The only thing I did was hit you in your body. But he would still be persecuting me, wouldn't he? So when you persecute my body, any part of it, even if you break my big toe, you're persecuting me. So Jesus then is showing, in the case of Paul, when you persecute, when you do these things, you're actually doing it to me. He's already told us that when you give a disciple a cup of cold water in my name, you will receive your reward. See? And so since we are members of the body of Christ, even if you're a toenail on the little toe, still you're a part of Jesus Christ. And so when we help and do these good things to the people of God, if they're hungry, if they're naked, whatever it is, if they're in prison, and this in prison would not be talking about some hardened criminal, a child rapist that is out here and he gets thrown in jail. It's talking about the brethren. why in the world would there be so many brethren in prison? Right now, you and I don't have that particular situation. How many of you know of a Christian, a faithful Christian, who is in prison? We'd say, well, I don't know of any faithful ones. I've heard of 2 or 3 Christians. One of them killed somebody, and they were a murderer, and somebody else did something else. And I'm thinking about one guy right now, one preacher. He wrote a $2,500 hot check, and that was too much, and the FBI arrested him, and I visited him in jail. But these are guilty people, and in all my life, I've only known of 2 or 3 people. Why would be a prison be such a big thing, especially for Christians? What about back at that time, as they were Christians, were they subject to be thrown in prison and persecuted for being a Christian? And so this is the kind of people he's talking about. So when you help the very least Christian, you have helped me. Then he looks at the goats on his left, and he says just the opposite to them then. So he says in verse 41, then shall he say unto them on the left hand, depart from me, ye cursed, into the eternal fire, which is prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, you did not give me to eat. I was thirsty, you did not give me to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me not in. And you clothed me not, and when I was naked. Sick and in prison, you visited me not. Then shall they also say, Lord, when saw thee we hungry, and so forth. Now, I suppose, this is a guess, but I think it's a pretty good guess. I'll just ask you. If you take all the friends you know who don't profess to be a Christian, they don't profess to even believe the Bible. If they knew that Jesus Christ was on this earth and was hungry, would they give him something to eat? How many people do you know are so bad that they wouldn't give him something to eat? Everybody would give him something to eat. So they're wondering, well, when did we not do this? Well, it's when you didn't treat my people right. When you didn't help them. When you didn't recognize me, Christ, when you didn't recognize me as the head of my body, and when my body was suffering, you didn't help my body. You were actually persecuting me. And so then he goes ahead and he says, and these shall go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. So he has shown that there will be a judgment day. There will be a separation of the good and the bad. There will be a punishment. Now, by the way, the word punishment right here, into eternal punishment, the Greek has 2 words for punishment. And one of the words is a punishment that you give to somebody in the form of chastisement to make them better. It's like a mom reaches over and slaps her little baby's hand. Say, no. Well, she is punished that. She's chastising. We use the word chastise. Doing this to try to make you better. The other word is a word that means a punishment that is a just punishment for the crime that has been committed. Now, in our judicial system, in fact, in all judicial systems, they have this, don't they? That there is a difference between stealing $1 and murdering somebody. The punishment is supposed to fit the crime. And so what he's saying here is that your punishment is going to fit your crime. For whatever you did, that punishment that is meted out is going to be fair. It's going to be just. Only God would know what the just punishment is. And God will see that we receive that just punishment. So you say, do you mean to tell me that there's going to be degrees of punishment? Well, yeah, I understand that there's going to be degrees of punishment. We've already studied about 2 servants. What does he say about one servant who knew to do the master's will and didn't do it? and another one that did not know what the master's will was, and he didn't do it. And the master came back, and neither one of them had done it. Which one's going to be beaten with many stripes? The one that knew and didn't do it. One of the things that scares me is James chapter 3 and verse 1. And there he said, "Brethren, be not many of you teachers, for ye shall receive the greater condemnation." That's a scary thing. Why is it that I would receive a greater condemnation for errors that I teach than you would for maybe sitting there and believing it and saying, "Well, yeah, okay, I'll take that," but you don't teach that to anybody. Who has committed the greater sin? See, and so being a teacher is an awesome thing, and we need to realize that. When you start teaching the Word of God, that's an awesome thing. It's a scary thing. When you really think about it, it is just an absolutely fearful thing to think about the damage that can be done. How much damage can be done if I come up with a new idea and a new theory, and I present it to this group, and it's opposite of what the Bible teaches, but you believe it? How much damage will be done? Now, you say, "Well, I don't know, what all we'll do." But if everybody believes this, what will you do to your children and your family? You'll teach them that, won't you? What will they do to their children and their family? And maybe 50, 100 years from now, so somebody's going to be teaching that. Thousands of people will be believing that because I came up with some crazy idea that is not found in the Bible. And so it's a fearful thing when we think about the judgment day in that respect that's in there. Now, he gives that scene, and then he passes on now to something else. So now, as he passes on, we start now in chapter 26, 1 through 16. And here's where the plans for the betrayal of Christ is going to be laid. The Sanhedrin and Judas are getting ready to meet, and the day is Wednesday. It's the day before Jesus is going to be crucified here. Well, I guess it'll be 2 days before he's going to be crucified. The day's going to be Wednesday when this comes to pass. So let's now read what it has to say. "And it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said unto his disciples, You know that after 2 days the Passover cometh, and the Son of Man is delivered up to be crucified." Now, Wednesday and Thursday would be the 2 days here, and then the Son of Man is going to be delivered up to be crucified. Now, this is the 4th time Jesus has told them that he was going to be crucified. Do they believe it even on the 4th time? They still don't believe it on the 4th time. They're wondering, what kind of language is he talking? What does he mean here? So they don't really get upset about this in here. And now at verse 3. "Then were gathered together the chief priest and the elders of the people unto the court of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas. And they took counsel together that they might take Jesus by subtlety and kill him. But they said, Not during the feast, lest a tumult arise among the people." So now, here it is. It's the Feast of the Passover. How many people are going to be there for the Feast of the Passover? How many Jews? At least all male Jews from 12 years old and upward will be there. Now, what have we just learned about the Jews who are there when Jesus made his triumphal entry? Now, this is Wednesday. Last Sunday, the Sunday before, he made that entrance and he came down. And what kind of reception did he get? That real welcome reception. And so, of course, the Sanhedrin, that's composed of all of these people here, and the council there, they don't want to go out publicly because they know that there will be an uproar. If they could arrest him privately, fine, but they're not going to try to go out publicly and arrest him, not until after the feast is over, because they're afraid of this great rebellion that you have here. Now, it says this high priest was called Caiaphas. We're going to come into contact with him again, and so I'm going to tell you something kind of unique about him. In fact, I'll tell you two things unique about him. First of all, something that doesn't make any difference except just this last couple of years, I think it was year before last, maybe it was last year, they found one of these ossuaries. An ossuary is a little piece of pottery. It's about this long and about that high, and it's where you put the bones of people. They would bury the body in a cave, take a body, put it in a cave, leave it there for 1 year. And then go back at the end of 1 year, all the flesh would be decayed, only the bones left. They'd take the bones and they'd put them in this piece of pottery and put a lid on it, and it's called an ossuary. And they found the one that had Caiaphas' name on it. And so they found his bones that is there at any rate. Now, that's not the big thing. A little bit later on, we're going to see that there's going to be two high priests that Jesus is going to have to stand before. There's going to be a guy by the name of Annas and a guy by the name of Caiaphas. So now here Caiaphas is involved. So now, as we look at this, we'll give you something here about him. First of all, the 2 days mentioned here are Wednesday and Thursday and so forth. Now, Annas was the real Jewish high priest. He's the one that should be the high priest, but Josephus tells us that Caiaphas had been appointed in AD 26 by this Roman procurator. So this Roman ruler had disposed Annas and had appointed Caiaphas in his place here. So Annas was recognized as the legitimate high priest by the Jews, but Caiaphas was recognized as the high priest by the Gentiles, by the Romans. So they both functioned, one religiously, one legally, with the Romans and so forth. Now later on, we're going to come in here, and they're going to bring him before, when the Jews bring him, they're going to bring him before Annas. And we'll see why. Annas is the one that they recognize as the high priest. But when they get ready to crucify him, and they call in the Romans, and they want the Romans to take him, who are they going to turn him over to give to the Romans? See? They'll turn him over to Caiaphas. And so we come across this guy right here at this particular time then. Okay, now an incident happened right here, and probably, we don't know for sure, but probably this incident of having this dinner, this supper, happened a few nights before this. When you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, well, you find a couple of them seem to put it a few days before. Now, you might say, well, why didn't Matthew? Does Matthew try to put things in chronological order? No, he puts things in topical order. He doesn't try to put things in chronological order. So you read this, then the next chapter is this. He just takes the events. It's like you might write a book about me. There's two ways you could do it. You could say, now let's sit down and let's put Lowell's life in order from the time he was born and he did this and he did this. Or you could say, like you did out there in that party you gave me where you were persecuting me, you say, okay, let's find all the bad stories we can find on Lowell, and then we're not going to put them in chronological order, but we're just going to hit here and here and here and here, and so you put them that way. That's topical order. That's the way Matthew writes this. So now, the reason I think that he's putting it here is because at this particular dinner, which happened 2 or 3 nights before, at this particular dinner, Judas had something to happen to him that sparked an idea in his brain, and he's getting ready to make arrangements with the Sanhedrin to betray Jesus. Let's look now. Judas was money hungry. Let's look and let's see now a couple of things about this dinner. Now, when Jesus was in Bethany, where's Bethany? It's up at the top of Mount Olives. You see, Jesus would always go back up, go to the top of Mount Olives, and Bethany was a little town out there. You remember who lived out there at Bethany? Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived out there. Okay, now he was out there in the house of Simon the leper. So here's a guy who evidently had been a leper. He's cured now. There came unto him a woman having an alabaster cruse of exceeding precious ointment, and she poured it on his head as he sat at meat. It's generally thought this must be Mary. That's where they would be out there in that vicinity, but we don't know that for sure. So she came and she had this alabaster cruse here of exceeding precious ointment, which in our money would be worth a few $100s here. But now, that would impress me if my wife came in and she had a perfume bottle, and I don't care whether it's one just this big or whether it's one this big, and she said, honey, look at the perfume I bought today. Well, I ask her the question that I always ask, one that every wife loves to hear from her husband. Do you like it? My first question is, not let me smell it, but how much it cost. Suppose she said, I got this bottle for $350. That would impress me. That would be exceedingly valuable in there. Doing this? So she took this, that would be worth a few $100s, and she poured it out on his head. And the other writers, Matthew and Mark, says she poured it out on his head and even down on his feet. So she just poured it really all over him. And when the disciples saw it, they had indignation, saying, to what purpose is this waste? It's just throwing good money away. For this ointment might have been sold for much and given to the poor. But Jesus, perceiving it, said unto them, why trouble ye the woman? For she hath wrought a good work unto me. For you have the poor always with you, but me you have not always. Now, I'm going to stop right here. The one that was making the complaint was Judas, making the complaint about all the waste of money. And it says because he had been taking money out of the purse all along. He was a thief. So Judas had been a thief all along, taking that money out. It's interesting to contemplate about Judas. I was thinking about him I think I was laying in bed, thinking about Judas. Had I lived back there, what kind of a guy was he? Was he a real bad guy? What would we have thought about him? What would you think, about Judas? Well, first of all, there's certain things I know, and I know this. I know that God had prophesied in the Old Testament that one of his dear friends would betray him. So I know that when Jesus chose the 12 men, he chose the men that he needed. He chose a man like Peter, who was that impetuous guy. Now, is being impetuous jumping to action before you think it through, is that good or bad? Well, sure gets you into a lot of trouble, can it? And it got Peter into a lot of trouble. But if you have something that needs to be done, and you need a man to send out and get it done right now, what kind of guy are you going to call in if you had an employee? Are you going to call in the guy that says, well, now wait just a minute, let's think this over. Are you sure you want me to go down there? Yeah. Well, have you considered it might be better? Go. Well, I think we'd make more money if, look, stay here. Call this guy. Go. And so, yeah, you need a guy like this. Who was it on the day of Pentecost with all of these thousands of people out there that had crucified Christ? Who was it that the Lord chose to jump out and accuse them of murder and preach that sermon? It was a Peter. You need a Peter to do that. You need a John for love. You need a Paul for a scholar, for a man that can go out and talk with the kings and the Jews and the Gentiles, and a universal individual, a man that nobody could question his integrity, nobody could question his scholarship, his mind, and so forth. That you couldn't say he's deceived like they would try to say the other people were deceived there, but not with Paul. The Lord chose men that he needed. Now, the Lord chose Judas. The Lord did not make Judas an evil man. The Lord chose Judas because he was that kind of an individual. He was the kind of individual that when the temptation got to a certain point, he would break and he would take it. See? Well, as you look at Judas and you say, boy, he must have been a mean, I wouldn't like him at all. When the Lord called Judas and called those 12, as they were going through life for those 3 years, Judas went right along with all of them, didn't he? When even they said, we're going to go to Jerusalem and we'll probably get killed, Judas is right there. Judas is going along. Now, all this time, he's been taking money out of that bag. All this time, he's been stealing. Now, the question might come up of, how could he live such a double life? Well, does that ever happen to people today? People today live a double life, some of the nicest people that you ever know, and they turn out to be a child rapist, the Green River killer, or something. How can people do this? I don't know. I don't know how I don't know the workings of the mind like that. But this was Judas. Judas was a thief. Somehow he justified it. But there comes a breaking point to when he sees an opportunity to make enough money, and it's like people say everybody has a price. I don't believe that. But everybody has a price, and Judas had a price. So now Judas is here, and he's the guy that was stealing the money out of the bag. And he saw this, and it's a waste. But let's go back here to this. Now, the Lord said, you have the poor always with you, but me you have not always. So he said, I want you to know, if you want to help the poor, you'll always have an opportunity to help the poor. There will always be poor people. And so you'll never have an excuse of saying, I don't know where there's any poor people. There's always poor people. But I will not always be here with you. For in that she poured the ointment upon my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Now this shows that she understood something that those 12 men didn't understand. As yet, they didn't understand he was actually going to be killed. But this lady did. She understood this. And she understood there's no stopping it. That he's going there, and he has said this, and she comprehends this. In fact, as far as I know, she's the only person on the face of the earth that understood this other than the Lord himself. So she knows he's going to be going in, and she now is doing the only thing she knows to do, and he said, she's preparing me for my burial. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, that also which this woman hath done shall be spoken of for a memorial of her. So he said, now I want to tell you guys something else. Wherever the gospel is preached, this story will be told. Well, that's fulfilled here tonight, isn't it? Here it is. It's told here. It's told everywhere. And a lesson we might get from this again is those lessons on small things. We're going to be judged by small things. And it's small things that really count. Very few people do big things that really change the world. But it seems to be the little things that really change the world. Just little decisions of what you'll do here and what you will do there. Now, when this woman poured that ointment on there, do you suppose that she could conceive in her mind of the fact that what I'm getting ready to do will be a story that's told around the world as long as the world stands? See? Obviously, it would not have entered her mind. But this small thing that she did was something that is still going on in this story that's to be told. So let's never underestimate the power of a small work. Doing some insignificant thing, and then all of a sudden, years later, you'll see it's that insignificant thing that did this, that insignificant thing did that, and you might not even know what you did. I've had the privilege, since I've lived so long, 432 years exactly, to have a few of these things that's happened. somebody, I think, went to Florida or Georgia or someone that came back here and said, do you know this guy? And this preacher, I said, no. So, well, we told him, we go up there where Lowell preaches. And he said, oh, that man changed my life? It was way back in, I don't know, in the 50s or 60s. He came to Indiana and he preached a sermon. And that sermon, it just totally changed my life. And as a result of that sermon, I'm preaching. I started preaching, and I've been preaching now for the last 40 years. And I don't even know the guy. Don't even know him. A guy by the name of Don Alexander. You see his name in the songbook. He's written several songs, and we sing them here. I was down in California here a while back and holding a meeting, and we went out and to a people's house on Sunday night and was eating. And he said, Lowell, do you remember? And I said, no, I don't remember. But a sermon you preached in Oregon, up there, Beaverton, Oregon, and it was this and that. Well, I don't really remember. Well, he said, it's a result of that sermon that I left there and I became a preacher of the gospel and have been preaching ever since. Huh. Well, I'll say, what a sermon. Boy, that must have been a big one, huh? I wish I knew what it was so I could preach it again. No, it was just a sermon that touched his heart. But a lot of good came from it. Now, when you take that, let's just say these two guys are the only two guys I've had any influence on. You take this, how many people have they influenced, see, because they're preaching? And then how many people will they influence, see? And in 100 years from now, it can well be that good influence can still go on from something that I didn't even know I was doing, and now when you call my attention to it, I can't even tell you what it was. See? Now, we all have that to happen. The only reason I give you my experience is because mine's the only one I know. And so, but we all have that to happen. And you can say, yeah, I know, I touched somebody's heart, or they told me this or that, and it comes in. So don't ever, ever, ever take it lightly. Some little good thing you do can just go on, and some little bad thing you do can also turn the world upside down. The judgment day is coming. Now, after this, 14, then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went unto the chief priest and said, what are you willing to give me, and I will deliver him unto you? And they weighed unto him 30 pieces of silver, and from that time he sought opportunity to deliver him unto them. So Judas now goes here on this Wednesday, and the Sanhedrin has met, and they said, we want to find a way to get him. That news gets out, and Judas, of course, goes and said they weighed him 30 pieces of silver. The word weigh here, might talk about this, it's not a big deal, but they used to weigh silver. And if you wanted $15 worth of silver, they would weigh it. It would be so much. And then finally, by the New Testament time, they had taken this amount of weight and they had put it into a coin. And so if you wanted $15 of silver, they'd give you this coin because it weighed $15 worth of silver. So it was $15. So this is probably the language that's talking here. They when you say, well, how much will you weigh me out of this? Is how much will you pay me? And so they paid him then these 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver. I did a little looking up today, and the only thing I could find was, as I was looking at it, that back in about 1865, it was worth about $15. So you can take inflation and put it however you want to take it that's in there to see what it would be worth, but it would be worth very, very little. Now, verse 17, and on the first day of unleavened bread. So now then, we're moving on to another thing here, and this is eating the Passover. Now, on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, where wilt thou that we make ready for thee to eat the Passover? Now, he's going to eat the Passover, and at this time, he's going to establish the Lord's Supper. All right, as we look at this, in eating the Passover, I want to cover this tonight before our time runs out. That is, he uses unleavened bread and Passover at the same time, same place, you see. He talks about unleavened bread, and then he says he's going to eat the Passover. Let's learn what this is so we can see it, because they were used interchangeably. Now, the Feast of the Passover came on the 14th day of the first month in the Hebrew calendar that was called Nisan. Here in Exodus 12, it said, "This month shall be unto you the beginning of months, and it shall be the first month of the year unto you. Speaking to the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to their father's house, a lamb for a household. And ye shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at even." That is, you're going to kill it on the 14th day. "And they shall eat the flesh in that night." That is the 14th day of the first month. So they'll eat that, roast with fire, and unleavened bread with bitter herbs shall they eat it. So that's what was to be used. The unleavened bread, the roasted lamb, and bitter herbs. That is what Moses said they were to eat. So we know now that when the Lord instituted the Lord's Supper, he used unleavened bread. There was a feast called unleavened bread, and it started on the very next day, the 15th day of the first month. So this meant that on the 13th day of the month, because they couldn't eat leaven on the 14th, the Feast of the Passover. So on the 13th day of the month, all the Jews would get up in their cupboards and cabinets, and they would remove all the leaven, and it's taken out of the house. Leaven, to the Jews, symbolized sin, because when you put leaven in bread, that's what gives it the ability to spoil, and the fermentation and so forth that goes on, and so that it can spoil. So it is a synonym or figure of speech for sin that is used, well, down through mankind, not only among the Jews. So now, here he says, if you notice in Exodus 12, same chapter, "In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, ye shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day. So you're going to do this down there. "No bread, no leaven shall be found in there." A more clear statement is found in Leviticus 23. "These are the set feast of Jehovah, even holy convocations," that is, holy assemblies that you're to have, "which you shall proclaim in their appointed season. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, is Jehovah's Passover." So that's when they killed the Passover lamb, spread the blood on the post, and so forth. So 14th day of the first month, they always then ate the Passover. "And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto Jehovah. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread." So the 15th day, 7 days, up to the 21st day, then they were to eat this unleavened bread. Now, as a result of that, since you couldn't eat leaven on the day of the Passover, since unleavened bread, the feast started the day after the Passover, the 14th day of the Passover and the unleavened bread, they just became terms used synonymously because it became one big feast. And that's why he's saying here that in here the unleavened bread and the Feast of the Passover in here. And that explains in Acts the 12th chapter, in 1 through 4, remember where Herod locked up Peter and is getting ready to kill Peter? Now about that time Herod the king put forth his hand to afflict certain of the church. And he killed James the brother of John with the sword. And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. And those were the days of unleavened bread. So he did this during the days of unleavened bread. And when he had taken him, he put him in prison, delivered him to the 4 quaternions of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him forth to the people. So he uses them synonymously, that is there, since they butted right up against each other in doing that. Okay. Right here is where we're going to have to stop. I'll say this. Let's look on here. We got about two more minutes here. So they came and they said, "Where will we eat the Passover?" And he said, "Go into the city to such a man and say unto him, The teacher saith, My time is at hand. I keep the Passover in thy house with my disciples. And the disciples did as Jesus appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. Now, as you read this here, I made a copy of McGarvey's Fourfold Gospel. What he does is he takes a statement out of Matthew and Mark and Luke, and he puts them together, and so that you can kind of read them. And here's the way it would read if you put them all together. It's kind of interesting here of everything that was said. And he said, Peter and John, two of his disciples, saying, Go and make ready for us the Passover, that we may eat. And they said unto him, Where wilt thou that we go to make ready? And he said unto them, Go into the city, and behold, when you enter into the city, there you shall meet a man bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house wherever he goeth. And whithersoever he shall enter in, say, and ye shall say unto the master of the house, here, Go into the city to such a man, and say unto him. In other words, this is where all of them are saying this. The teacher saith to thee, My time is at hand. I keep the Passover in thy house with my disciples. Where is my guest chamber, where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples? So, one thing that was known about the Jews at the Passover time is that they all opened up their homes for people to come in and use their homes to eat. So it wasn't an unusual thing. But it was unusual for Jesus to be able to send from Bethany, way out there about 2 or 3 miles away, to send them over and say, Now you go over and you'll find a man carrying a pitcher, and then you go up to him, to the master of the house, you follow him up there and say, The master wants to use your room, and he will let you use it. And so Jesus was able to know, the guy could foresee it carrying the pitcher, whose house it was going to be, and so forth. So next week, that's where then we'll pick up our story. Here in this room, the Lord now is getting ready to eat the Passover meal, and he will establish the Lord's Supper at this time. Okay, class dismissed.